As the city is swallowed by the cobalt dusk, the secrets of the day begin to find their way into the light. We explore the mysterious and beautiful narratives that only reveal themselves when the sun goes down. Hit subscribe now and follow us into the deep blue night.
The garage smelled like motor oil and sawdust the night I made my decision. I had spent 41 years building something from nothing. A construction company that started with one used truck, 2 employees, and a dream that kept me awake more nights than I can count. By the time I turned 63, that company was worth more than I ever imagined possible for a kid who grew up sharing a bedroom with 3 brothers in rural Tennessee. And yet, sitting alone in that garage on a cold January evening, surrounded by the tools of a life I had poured everything into, I felt something I had never expected to feel at this stage. Invisible, not to the world, to my own children. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened. I am not a perfect man. I worked too much. I missed birthday parties and school plays and recitals. I told myself I was doing it for them, and I was, partly. But I was also doing it because I loved the work. And that is a truth I had to sit with for a long time before I was ready to be honest about it. My wife, God rest her soul, understood that about me better than I ever understood it myself. She passed 8 years ago, and when she left, something shifted in our family in ways I did not fully see until much later. My eldest son became an orthopedic surgeon. I paid for every year of his education without hesitation, undergraduate, medical school, residency costs that most people do not realize exist. He is talented. He is respected. He drives a car that costs more than the house I grew up in. When his practice needed new equipment 2 years ago, he called me, and I wired $60,000 to his account within the hour, because that is what fathers do. Or at least, that is what I believed. My middle daughter became a partner at a corporate law firm in Atlanta. She is sharp. In a way that used to make me proud to the point of tears. She got that mind from her mother. Law school, bar prep, the apartment she needed in a good neighborhood when she was just starting out, the professional wardrobe that her firm expected. I helped with all of it, gladly, because I wanted her to have every advantage. When her firm made her partner 3 years ago, I flew down for the celebration dinner. I sat at the end of the table while her colleagues congratulated her, and I smiled the whole evening, even though she introduced me as my father from Tennessee and moved on quickly to the next conversation. My youngest son became an electrician. He runs his own small electrical contracting business, residential and light commercial work mostly. He drives a pickup truck that has seen better days. He and his wife live in a 3-bedroom house in the same county where I live, about 20 minutes from my place. They have 2 kids, a dog that sheds everywhere, and a yard that always seems to have a project going on. He never asked me for money. Not once. When I offered to help him expand his business years ago, he thanked me and said he wanted to figure it out himself. I respected that, though I did not fully understand it at the time. The 3 of them are not close with each other. They are polite at holidays, the ones when everyone actually shows up, but there is a distance between my eldest and youngest that has always made me uncomfortable. My eldest son has said things over the years, subtle things, about the choices my youngest made. Nothing overtly cruel. Just the particular kind of condescension that educated people sometimes do not realize they are performing. The reason I was sitting in my garage that January night was this. I had just gotten off the phone with my eldest son. I had called to tell him I was thinking about revising my estate plans and wanted to have a conversation with all 3 of them about it. He told me he was between patients and could not talk, but that he trusted me to do whatever made sense. His tone was the tone of a man who considers a conversation finished before it begins. When I said I wanted us all together, maybe over a weekend, he said he would check his schedule and get back to me. That was 3 weeks ago. He had not gotten back to me. My middle daughter, when I reached her the following day, was warmer but not by much. She said she thought it was smart to get estate planning in order. And could I have my attorney send her the documents to review? I told her that was not quite what I meant, that I wanted to talk, as a family. She said, of course, absolutely. She just wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. Then she mentioned, almost as an aside, that she had been looking at a lake house property. and the seller wanted a decision within 30 days. She did not ask directly. She never asked directly, but the implication was there, the way it always was with her. I did not call my youngest son that night. I just sat in the garage and thought. What I thought about was a conversation I'd had with my oldest friend, a man named Gerald who had known me since we were 17 years old. Gerald had gone through something similar with his own family after he had a real health scare, a cardiac event that put him in the hospital for 5 days. He told me that the experience revealed things about his children that he had spent years not allowing himself to see. He said the hardest part was not what they did or did not do. The hardest part was realizing he had constructed a version of his family inside his head that had very little to do with who his children had actually become. That conversation stayed with me. I am not a man who makes impulsive decisions. I spent 2 months thinking about what I was considering. I talked to my doctor, who was not exactly enthusiastic but who knew me well enough to understand I was going to do what I was going to do. I talked to my attorney, a woman I have trusted for 15 years. And I told her exactly what I needed from her and when. I made sure the plan was careful. I made sure no one would be genuinely harmed. And then, on a Tuesday morning in late March, I began. I called my eldest son first. I told him that the company was in serious trouble, that a major project had collapsed, that the bank was calling in a line of credit, that my accountant had given me numbers that kept me up at night. I told him I was looking at potentially losing most of what I had built. My voice was not steady when I said it. That part was not entirely performance. There was a silence on his end. Then he said, "Dad, I'm so sorry. That's really stressful. Have you talked to a financial advisor?" I said I had, and that the situation was more serious than an advisor could fix. I told him I might need to sell the house. I told him I was scared. He said, "Dad, you know I would help if I could. But I've got the practice overhead. And with the kids in private school now, you know how it is. Have you looked into whether there are any government programs? For small business owners, I think there might be something." I told him I would look into it. He said, "Keep me posted, okay? I've got a surgery in 20 minutes, but I'll call you this weekend." He did not call that weekend. I waited 4 days before I called my middle daughter. I told her the same thing, the company, the bank, the possibility of losing the house. I added, as I had planned, that I might need to stay somewhere temporarily while things got sorted out. I did not ask directly. I just let that sit there, the same way she always let things sit there. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Oh, Dad, I'm really sorry. That must be so hard after everything you've built." Her voice was full of genuine-sounding sympathy, and for just a moment I almost felt guilty for what I was doing. Then she said, "You know, with my schedule right now, my spare room is basically a home office at this point, and I'm traveling so much for work. Have you thought about maybe looking at one of those senior living communities? Some of them are really lovely, not like the old nursing homes, and you'd have people around." I was 66 years old. I had run a multi-million-dollar company for 4 decades. She continued, "Also, I don't want to bring this up at a bad time, but the lake house I mentioned, the seller moved the deadline up. I've been going back and forth on it, but honestly, the location is perfect, and it's probably going to be gone by next month." I told her I understood about the spare room. I told her I would look into her other suggestion. I did not mention the lake house. That night, I drove to my youngest son's house unannounced. I had not done that in years. I was always careful to call ahead, to not impose, but that night I just drove there, and I sat in my truck in front of his house for a few minutes before I went to the door. His wife answered. She took one look at my face and pulled the door open wider without saying a word. My youngest son came out of the kitchen drying his hands on a dish towel, and when he saw me, he said, "Dad, what happened?" I told him the same story I had told his siblings. I tried to keep my voice steady and matter of fact, the way I had with the others. But something about being in that house, with the dog pressing against my leg and the smell of whatever they had cooked for dinner still in the air, made it harder than I expected. He did not say anything for a moment after I finished. Then he said, "Okay, you're staying here. We'll figure the rest out." His wife said, "I'll make up the guest room." I told them I did not want to disrupt their home. I told them it might be a while before things got resolved. I told them the situation was genuinely uncertain. I was giving them every reasonable exit. My youngest son looked at me like I had said something slightly ridiculous. He said, "Dad, you're not a disruption. You're my father. Stop talking like you have to earn a place here." I did not trust my voice right then. So I just nodded. I stayed for 11 days. I want you to understand what those 11 days actually looked like, because it matters. My youngest son got up every morning at 5:30 to get to his first job by 7. His wife worked the early shift at the hospital 3 days a week. She is a physical therapist, and on those mornings, one of them would ask me to listen for the kids until they woke up. So I made my grandchildren breakfast. I sat with them while they got ready for school. I drove them once when both parents had scheduling conflicts, and my granddaughter fell asleep against my arm on the way home from school, and I sat there for 20 minutes in the driveway not wanting to move. On the third day, my youngest son's truck needed a repair that he did not have the cash for right then. A part that was going to cost $400 that he needed for a job the following week. I overheard him on the phone with the parts supplier. That evening at dinner he mentioned it casually, the way people mention problems they are already solving. I offered to help. He said absolutely not. That I had my own situation to deal with. That he would work it out. He worked it out. He called in a favor from a supplier he had a relationship with and arranged to pay when the job came through. He did not ask me for a single dollar the entire time I was there. On the 7th day, his wife found me sitting on the back porch after everyone had gone to bed. She sat down next to me without asking why I was up, and we talked for almost 2 hours about my wife, about what it had been like watching my company grow, about what she and my youngest son were hoping for over the next few years. She was not performing kindness. She was just present in the uncomplicated way that some people are, and it struck me that I had never properly appreciated her. On the 9th day, my eldest son sent me a text message. It said he had been thinking about my situation and had talked to a colleague who knew someone at a financial consulting firm. He included a phone number. He signed it with his name, not love or talk soon. Just his name. My middle daughter called on the 10th day. She had found, she told me, a very well-reviewed independent living facility about 40 minutes from her office in Atlanta. She had already looked at their website. She read me some of the amenities. Her voice was kind and practical, and it sounded exactly like the voice she used when she was wrapping up a client call. On the 11th morning, I called my attorney and told her it was time. She arrived at my youngest son's house at 10 in the morning, and I had asked the previous evening if my eldest and my middle daughter could also be there. I had told each of them separately that there had been a development with the company situation, something that required everyone to hear together. My eldest son drove up from Nashville. My middle daughter flew in from Atlanta. This, I noted, they managed to do within 18 hours. We sat in my youngest son's living room. My attorney set her briefcase on the coffee table. My eldest son was looking at his phone. My middle daughter was looking around the room in a way that was not quite rude, but was not quite not rude either. My youngest son was sitting next to his wife with his elbows on his knees, looking at me with an expression I could not entirely read. My attorney opened the briefcase. She explained, methodically and without editorial, that the financial situation I had described to my children was not real, that the company was not in trouble, that there was no bank calling in a line of credit, that I was in fact in a stronger financial position than most people would guess, that the company, the properties, the investments, and the liquid assets totaled approximately $4.8 million in net worth. She placed a one-page summary on the coffee table. My eldest son stopped looking at his phone. My middle daughter became very still. My youngest son stared at me. His wife put her hand on his arm. My attorney continued. She explained that I had made decisions about my estate that I wanted to communicate directly and in person, that I believed clarity now was kinder than ambiguity later. She slid 3 envelopes across the table. My youngest son's envelope contained documentation transferring to him immediately. 20% ownership of the company, the residential contracting division specifically, which aligned with his skills, and which I had quietly restructured over the preceding 2 months. It also contained a property deed. Not the main house. A piece of land I owned outside of town, 12 acres, that he and his wife had once mentioned, in passing, would be a perfect place to build if they ever had the means, and a check for $240,000, which I had calculated to represent what I estimated his siblings had received from me over the years in direct financial support. Support he had never asked for or received. I looked at my youngest son when my attorney finished reading. He was looking at the envelope in his hands and not at me, and I could see from the angle of his jaw that he was working very hard to hold himself together. His wife was crying without making any noise. He finally looked up. He said, "Dad, you didn't have to." I said, "I know I didn't have to." That's the point. My middle daughter's envelope and my eldest son's envelope each contained documentation as well. They would each receive an inheritance upon my death, as any parent would provide meaningful amounts that would make a difference in their lives. But it was structured differently than what either of them had likely imagined. More importantly, there were conditions, not punitive ones, not designed to humiliate, but real ones. Each of them was required to spend 1 year before any distribution was made participating in a structured community engagement commitment. My attorney had already spoken with 2 organizations: a medical outreach clinic that provided free orthopedic consultations to uninsured patients in rural counties, and a legal aid organization in Atlanta that represented low-income families in housing and employment disputes. My eldest son's surgical skills were needed in one. My middle daughter's legal expertise was needed in the other. 40 hours each. Not writing a check. Actually showing up. My middle daughter said, "Dad, I don't," and then stopped. My eldest son said nothing. He was looking at the summary page on the coffee table. I said what I had been rehearsing and also what I had never planned, which was somehow both things at once. I told them that I did not do this to punish them. I told them I had been thinking for a long time about what kind of father I had been and what kind of father I still wanted to be, and that part of being that kind of father meant being honest about what I had seen during those 11 days. I told them that I loved them in the way that parents love children completely and without condition, and also with a grief that I could not entirely name for the people they had become when I was not paying attention. I told my eldest son that I remembered the summer he was 12, and we built a deck together on the back of the house, and that the version of him who had handed me boards and asked 100 questions and eaten 3 sandwiches for lunch was a person I missed. I told him I hoped that person was still in there somewhere, and that I believed he was, and that I thought those 40 hours might help him find his way back to something he had set down without noticing. I told my middle daughter that she had her mother's mind, and that her mother had used that mind to take care of people who needed taking care of, and that I did not think she had forgotten that I thought she had just gotten very busy. I told her I understood busy. I had spent most of my life being busy. I told her I was not proud of all the ways that busy had shaped me, and that I hoped the next year might give her something that spreadsheets and billable hours could not. Neither of them said much after that. My eldest son stood up and walked outside for a few minutes. When he came back in, his face was different. Not resolved, not at peace, just different. He said, "I need some time with this." I told him to take as much time as he needed. He shook my hand before he left, and then, at the door, he turned around and hugged me. It lasted about 3 seconds. It was the first time he had done that in longer than I could remember. My middle daughter sat for a while after he left. She said, "I suggested a senior living facility." She said it quietly, to the middle distance, not to me. Then she said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I told her I knew. She hugged me longer than her brother had. After they both left, I sat alone in the living room for a few minutes. My youngest son came in from where he had been standing in the kitchen doorway, giving his siblings room. He sat across from me and looked at me with the same expression he'd had when I showed up at his door. He said, "How long were you planning this?" I said, "Long enough to be sure." He said, "The truck repair. The $400. You offered that night." I said yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't want the company stake because of this, Dad. I want it because I earned it." I looked at him and said, "Son, I know that. That's why you're getting it." He looked down and nodded slowly, and I could see him deciding to accept that. Not easily, but genuinely. That evening, my youngest son's family made dinner a real one. The kind that takes a while, where everyone is moving around the kitchen and someone is setting the table and a kid is being underfoot for no useful reason. My granddaughter asked me to sit next to her. My grandson, who is 7 and deeply serious about things he has decided are important, told me at length about a project he was building in the backyard. The dog put his head in my lap at some point, and nobody made him move. I sat at that table, and I thought about the lake house where this had all started. The silence I had described to no one, but felt completely. I thought about Gerald, and the cardiac event that had forced clarity on him without his permission. I thought about my wife, and what she would have made of all of this, and I decided she would have said I had waited too long, and also that I had done it right. I am not telling this story because I am proud of myself. I made mistakes for many years that contributed to the distance I was trying to cross. Testing your children is not a thing any parent should have to do. And if I am being honest, a part of me wishes I had found a different way to understand what I came to understand. But I was 66 years old and I was running out of patience for the version of my family that existed only in my imagination. And sometimes the only way forward through a thing is straight through it. What I know now, that I did not know clearly before, is this. The people who show up when you have nothing to offer them are showing you something that cannot be faked, cannot be performed, and cannot be purchased. My youngest son did not take me in because of what I might leave him. He took me in because in his understanding of the world, that is simply what you do when someone you love needs a place to land. His wife did not sit with me on that porch because of any calculation. She sat there because she is the kind of person who notices when someone needs company. I do not know what my eldest son will find in those 40 hours at the rural clinic. I do not know what my middle daughter will carry home from the legal aid cases she takes on. Maybe nothing will shift. Maybe they will fulfill the requirement and walk away unchanged. I have made peace with that possibility. What I could give them, I gave not just the material things, but the chance to see themselves clearly and decide what to do with that. My attorney called me a week later to ask how I was doing. I told her I was good. She paused and said, "You know, in 20 years of estate work, I've seen a lot of ways families come apart over money. I don't see many where someone tries this hard to hold one together." I told her I had a good teacher. She asked who. I said I had an 11-year-old version of my youngest son who used to hand me boards and trust that we were building something worth building. On Sunday mornings now, I drive over to my youngest son's house and we have coffee on the back porch while his kids do whatever kids do on Sunday mornings. Sometimes we talk. Sometimes we just sit there, listening to the neighborhood come awake. His truck is still the same truck, a little more banged up than before. Mine is too. There is a kind of quiet I have found in the past months that is completely different from the quiet in my garage that January night. That one was the silence of a man who felt he had poured himself out for nothing. This one is the silence of someone who went looking for the truth about the people he loves and found, in the most unexpected place, exactly what he needed to find. I think about my wife most evenings. I think she would have known all along which envelope to open first. She always did understand our youngest boy better than I did. Better than any of us. If there is anything I want to leave you with, it is this. Do not wait for a crisis, real or otherwise, to find out who is in your corner. Do not assume the people who received the most from you will be the ones who give the most back. And do not, under any circumstances, confuse a person's ambition for their character. The most valuable thing in my life right now is a cup of bad coffee on a back porch on a Sunday morning with a man who drives a beat-up truck and never once asked me for anything. That is the whole story. I hope it means something to you.